What do a golden apple, a marriage oath, and a wooden horse have in common? They all warned Troy to stop, and Troy kept walking. In the next hour, we'll trace the chain of ignored signals: Paris's judgment, Helen's departure, Hector's cautions, Cassandra's visions, Laocoon's cry, and the gods who nudged events but never lifted the final latch. You'll learn how a war born from divine rivalry became a meditation on human blindness. If you've ever wondered how a city that's strong ended itself, you're in the right place. Chapter 1. An apple that split the world. Why would a single favor at a wedding decide the doom of a walled city? Because in this world, the gods use small tokens as levers on human law. The hint is a fruit with a dare cut into its skin. One word: fairest. We begin at a wedding arranged to keep a prophecy in check. A mortal king, Peleus, marries Thetis, a sea nymph whose child is fated to surpass his father. Zeus wants that child born to a human house, not a divine one. So, the feast draws gods and kings to the same table. One guest is not on the list. Eris, Discord, arrives anyway and sends her gift clattering to the floor: a golden apple, marked with a contest no court can ignore. Hera sees rank. Athena sees strategy. Aphrodite sees desire. Each steps forward with entitlement that fills the room. The apple becomes a throne. They do not ask for fairness. They demand a verdict. Zeus declines, and that refusal is itself a decision. He diverts the storm downhill to a shepherd prince on Mount Ida, a man raised far from the palace that first cast him out. Paris carries a royal name with a precarious history. At his birth, seers told Priam that this infant would bring ruin. The solution was cruelty masked as prudence. Remove the child, let chance finish the rest. Chance did not. The boy grew among herds, handsome and soft-spoken, trained by nature and time, not the court's tutors. He judges cattle contests and prizes symmetry. Now the cosmos asks him to judge divinity. Bribes enter the air quietly, as if they are natural law. Hera promises sovereignty, not over a field, but over many peoples. It is the whisper of imperial order, baked into marriage treaties and tribute lists. Athena offers victory, methodical and clean, the kind that turns cities into clients and writes history in straight lines. Aphrodite offers a person, Helen, famed for beauty and already bound by marriage. Each gift is framed as favor. Each is a claim on human institutions: throne, army, household. Greek myth returns to this device for a reason. When gods compete, the rules of human life go on trial. Oaths are stretched. Hospitality, xenia, sacred host-guest duty, takes stress. Kingship balances prestige and obligation. The apple is less a trinket than a test rig. The question is not who is fairest. It is, which pillar of society will bend first? Paris's choice is later sung as the start of a romance. But the weight sits elsewhere. Choosing Helen means choosing to override a contract under another man's roof. It is an assault on household sovereignty, the core unit of order in the Greek world. You are not just seducing a queen, you are seizing property under a god's protection, because marriage sanctifies a hearth and the bonds around it. That strikes deeper than flirtation. It is geopolitics disguised as taste. Back in Troy, Priam's earlier attempt to deflect doom shadows every move. He had tried to erase a risk by removing a son. Now that son, welcomed back after feats that revealed his royal blood, stands between flattered immortals and a city that wants peace. The first warning was clear. This life will fracture the house. It was answered with denial that called itself caution. The pattern holds. Soft decisions that move harm to the next day. Zeus's deflection is also a lesson in power. The highest authority claims neutrality, then hands the live wire to a mortal. Divine non-intervention looks impartial, but it loads consequence onto human shoulders. That is how the gods rig the field without moving a pawn. They tap a law, a right, a promise, and let people enforce it to the point of collapse. Paris's judgment is simple to say and expensive to live. He picks Aphrodite. In doing so, he injects desire into the bloodstream of treaties. Hera's empire would have needed armies and taxes. Athena's offer would have needed discipline and time. Aphrodite's path requires one voyage and one theft. It is quick. It is irreversible. It relocates the conflict from council rooms to a bedroom, then from a bedroom to a harbor. Notice the quiet symmetry between the wedding that starts this and the marriage that will be broken by it. A union created to manage fate becomes the backdrop for a prize that unravels it. The set piece repeats, a feast, a decision, a future traded for calm in the present. The apple falls once, but the logic it triggers rolls on. From the Greek perspective, a stolen wife is not one man's injury. It is a breach with legal teeth. Hospitality runs both ways. Guest and host honor each other before the gods. Violate that, and you invite a public remedy. This is why a banquet favor can decide the fate of a city. It sets off a chain of ritual obligations that extend past personal feeling and into the machinery of alliance. States live inside stories. They tell about honor. Break the story, and the states move. Paris leaves the hillside with a goddess's pledge and a path that leads straight into another man's hall. The dowry of that choice is invisible. Resentments, gossip among kings, arguments in council about precedent and duty. The apple's inscription feels narrow. The claim it authorizes is not. It lifts a private desire above communal law, and in doing so, calls the community to answer. Troy hears more warnings. The elders recall omens at Paris's birth. Priam listens and chooses family over prophecy. Again, it is humane. It is costly. A city can survive many raids, but it cannot survive a habit of ignoring the signal because the signal arrives at the wrong time. The judgment is complete. No trial, no appeal, just a prize, clarified by 3 bidders and 1 mortal nod. The cost, however, will echo in every oath sworn in Greek halls, because the theft that follows will activate those oaths like a trapline laid across the sea. Commanders will claim legitimacy not from desire, but from law, and that makes their ships hard to stop. So the apple is less a bauble than a beacon. The gods set the board by lacing their contest into human rules. People will move the pieces, one promise at a time, until the only path left is war. And before a single hull slides into open water, a marriage vow will tighten around every king who once asked for Helen's hand, and none of them will find a clean way out. Chapter 2. The Oath That Tightened Like a Net. How did a private marital choice become the warrant for a siege that drew in nearly every major house in Greece? It begins with a promise that dressed itself as honor and worked like policy. A clever device, sold as protection, built to bind rivals who could not be trusted to lose gracefully. Helen's name had already gathered a roomful of kings. They came to Sparta for her hand, each with ships behind him, each with men who expected a prize. Tyndareus, her guardian, faced a problem that could ignite his halls the moment he chose. One winner means many offended losers. A brawl in the courtyard would be the small disaster. A feud that lingered for years would be the larger one. So he listened to a visitor whose mind ran toward solutions with leverage rather than swords. Odysseus did not bid for Helen. He wanted another match and knew a favor would be worth more than a gamble. His counsel cut through the noise. Bind them now, before the decision, with an oath. Let each suitor swear to defend the chosen husband and his rights, if anyone attempts to take his wife or his property by force. The words sound gallant. The structure is legal. It converts romance into a collective guarantee. It turns risk into insurance, underwritten by every great name present. The vow is solemnized before the gods. Hands lift. Sacrifices speak smoke into the rafters. This was how Greek communities locked themselves to commitments that outlived moods. An oath is not a flourish. It is law, with a divine witness, and perjury carries a bill the gods are assumed to collect. When men swear in that register, they tie their reputation to enforcement. Break it, and you do not merely offend a friend. You invite divine penalty. Helen chooses Menelaus. Peace holds in the hall, and the losers depart with their self-respect intact, because they have pledged that the process is sacred. The device works, for a time. But the oath's teeth do not dull. They wait. Paris arrives later with divine backing, and a promise he believes outranks mortal bonds. He is not negotiating at a court. He is stepping into a house that has extended hospitality. Xenia governs the exchange between host and guest. Food offered, lodging granted, gifts exchanged. Both sides carry duties. To court your host's wife under his roof and leave with her and his treasure is not a dalliance. It is sacrilege. The hearth is a shrine. The violation stains guest and house, and it asks for redress that can scale to match the insult. Now the oath shows its hidden architecture. Menelaus's pain is real, but the summons he invokes is legal and shared. He does not need to beg allies. He calls in a bond they swore in sight of the gods. One household injury becomes a public case. One marriage becomes a test of whether Greek kings keep their word when the cost is measured in seasons at sea and graves on foreign soil. Troy misreads the moment. Treaties can be bargained. Anger cools. But vows sworn with sacrifice live in a stronger register. The second warning is cultural, not oracular. Do not assume that a breach of hospitality will pass as a private scandal. It will not. And do not assume that because the Greeks feud among themselves, they will pass on a clear claim. They will not. The sanctity of the hearth is older than any individual rivalry. Agamemnon uses this structure with skill. His power is real, but Greece is not a simple hierarchy. He needs a pretext that rises above personal ambition. The oath provides it. He can summon the suitors under the flag of legitimacy, not greed. Each leader who signed their name to that vow now faces a choice. Uphold it and preserve standing, or defy it and invite divine suspicion as well as political isolation. The net tightens without shouting. Kings who dislike each other agree to sail because the alternative would mark them as oath-breakers, a stain that clings in councils and epics alike. This is where law and faith blend. In a world where gods attend banquets and punish perjury, contractual language carries spiritual weight. Communities enforce such bonds because they do not want the gods to do it for them. The fear of divine retribution supports the fear of political loss. It is a double wall that rare men dare to scale. You can hear in the messenger's calls the claim repeated in a dozen halls, not romance, but contract, not jealousy, but duty. Menelaus's grievance is the front of the case, but the spine is the oath itself, and the Greeks know it. They move their ships into coves. They count amphorae and grind grain. A siege is not only rage, it is paperwork, rosters, and storage. The machine starts to turn, because a sentence turned desire into law months earlier in Sparta. In this same period, stories spread that the Palladium, the city's sacred protection, binds Troy to its gods. Ritual safeguards on one side, ritual obligation on the other. The matrix grows tight, and both cities expect their sanctities to hold. Troy trusts its walls and its rights. The Greeks trust their oath and the gods who witnessed it. Each side reads signs and chooses confidence over caution. Another warning passes unheeded. Sacred claims clash most fiercely when both parties feel backed by heaven. Odysseus's counsel, born of a quiet trade for his own suit, now becomes the hinge of a continent-spanning operation. This is the paradox. A policy built to prevent conflict becomes the legal fuse for the largest one of the age. And yet the logic holds. You cannot have a bond that works only when it is cheap. By now the ships are gathering. Ramps thud against keels. Spears are bundled. Charms are tied. The coalition is forming, each contingent carrying its own grudges and hopes, all sheathed inside the oath's wording. A strong alliance often needs a story, a shared sentence that makes men see themselves as one. This one has both divine witness and human interest, and that combination recruits the hesitant. The mini payoff is clear. The oath reframes love as law. It takes a household injury and writes it into public duty, giving Agamemnon his mandate and Menelaus his army. The kings accept the cost because they have already accepted the principle. A fleet waits on a chalky shore, masts like a forest. Their hands close on ropes. Their eyes tilt to the horizon. And then a goddess with a grievance decides that wind is a privilege. Chapter 3. Wind held hostage. What kind of war pauses for a single girl's life? One in which a breeze is a verdict, and logistics become a form of judgment. You can feel it at Aulis. Masts stand like bare trees. Sails hang dead. Oars creak in their bindings and go nowhere. An army waits, not for courage or provisions, but for wind. The delay is not chance. A seer names the cause. Artemis is angry. The fleet will not move until Agamemnon pays. The demand is specific and unbearable. Iphigenia, a daughter for a passage, a father for a commander. The oath that pulled kings together now tightens around a single household, and the price comes due in flesh before any enemy is met. Agamemnon stands in a narrow corridor between duty and blood. If he refuses, he risks revolt. Men bound by oath did not gather to rot in a harbor while their reputations mold. If he obeys, he risks sacrilege that no crown can wash clean. You can sense the council around him splitting along lines that all sound pious. Appease the goddess, honor the father, obey the seer, protect the army. Every option is framed as righteousness, which is what makes it so punishing. Versions divide on what follows, but the wound opens either way. In one telling, the knife falls. The altar is stained. The men, silent, accept the cost as the sailcloth begins to lift. In another, Artemis intervenes at the last heartbeat, substitutes a deer, and spirits Iphigenia to Taurus, far off, where she serves as a priestess in severity and exile. The second softens the surface, but the moral damage remains. A deception was staged. A child was led to an altar. A leader proved willing to trade private innocence for public motion. The stain is not removed by a switch. It is set by the decision to consent. Ancient warfare bends around rites and signs. Campaign seasons, auspices, sacrificial sequences, all of it is a calendar built from omens and approvals. Armies marched when the birds flew right and the smoke rose clean. At Aulis, the most practical thing an army could do was satisfy a ritual condition. That is not superstition in the trivial sense. It is infrastructure. Belief was the road under the carts and the joint in the oar. Men fight in alignment with the world they think they inhabit, and that world has rules enforced by gods. This is the third ignored warning. The war asks for a blood price before it even starts. A coalition that proceeds after such a demand is declaring its threshold. They will pay, again and again. The wind that rises will always carry that admission inside it. Even the version with rescue does not escape the lesson. A god can spare a life and still leave the human choice exposed for judgment. You can already see how this moment shadows later conflicts inside the Greek camp. Achilles will bridle when Agamemnon claims prerogative over what is not his. That anger does not come out of nowhere. It builds in a world where the leader's first famous decision involved a young life measured against a timetable. Respect, once cracked, does not set cleanly. Warriors tolerate hardship. They do not easily forgive leaders who use them as instruments of private calculation, disguised as public necessity. The fleet, meanwhile, learns something about itself. Its power is conditional. Its engines of wood and muscle answer to a god before they answer to a king. When the wind finally rises, it feels both earned and owed. Earned by sacrifice, owed to the deity. That mixture produces obedience. It also breeds resentment. You can smell both on the salted air as crews ready their gear. There is a paradox here that carries the force of an analogy. A harbor with 1,000 ships can be held in place by a silence you could fit in a child's lungs. No breath, no movement. The smallest unit of life becomes the lock on an empire's door. That is how the world works in this story. Scale deceives. A tiny thing can halt a continent's ambition. Agamemnon's household is not the only one altered. Clytemnestra learns what kind of war her husband serves. The court learns what the oath can demand when it meets a god's grievance. The soldiers learn that their lives will be counted in rituals as much as roles. None of this slows the launch. It simply defines the campaign's conscience, if it can be said to keep one. Some men argue that the ends justify the right. They speak of duty, order, the need to answer a public insult with a public force. Others register the trade without words. They sharpen spearheads and watch the shoreline, trying to square their piety with their hunger for honor. A leader's choices set the tone. Here the tone is grim arithmetic. What must be given to make the world permit movement? The sails finally belly. Lines snap taut. Prows pivot toward the open water. Men who slept on planks for weeks feel the deck change underfoot as the hull answers a force they cannot see. There is relief. There is triumph. There is also the knowledge that the goddess was appeased and that appeasement was purchased. Fate does not ask for the total sum at once. It takes installments. Today, a daughter. Tomorrow, a friend. After that, the best of a generation, scattered in graves that never learn their names. The armada moves because a god's anger has been answered to the degree mortals can manage. That is the mini payoff and the bill of lading. Every crate and helmet carries the weight of that choice. Every oar stroke repeats it. The water slaps the hulls with a rhythm that sounds like consent. Across the straits, black hulls will strike a foreign shore. The first defenders will find that they can scatter a landing party, but they cannot turn back a sea that has already been paid for. The wind, once captive, now serves men who have learned how far they will go to keep it. Chapter 4. Walls Stronger Than Swords. By all logic, a coalition of kings and the finest fighters of their age should have crushed one city in a single season. And yet Troy stood. Stone, planning and patience did what spears could not. The city sat on rich ground near the Hellespont, where trade ran like a river that never slept. Caravans fed its markets. Ships skimmed past its beaches. Every waggle of toll and treaty turned into bronze in its vaults. That wealth bought walls and watchmen, stores and scouts. It also bought time. You can feel the design when you walk the line. Layers of masonry, high gates, steep approaches that force attackers to slow down and show their throats. Inside, courtyards and magazines, wells protected, lanes tight enough to funnel movement. Troy is not reckless. It is trained endurance. And the figure who gives that endurance a face is Hector. Not a brawler chasing cheers, but a disciplined shield who understands that victory sometimes looks like denial. Keep men alive, keep gates shut, trade space for days, then let the days do the killing. The Greeks land hard and discover the rhythm of a long war. Raids spread along the coast. Allied towns pay first, not the city with the tallest towers. Outposts fall, storehouses burn. The Greeks cut tributary lines to thin Troy's strength. The Trojans answer with sallies. Champions meet between ditch and gate, throwing boasts as sharp as javelins. Some days a hero returns carrying spoils that prove a point. Other days the field is slick, and a misstep costs a life that cannot be replaced. Divine favor moves like weather. A sudden surge lifts one side, then the gust drops, and the line settles into grunts and silence. Rain rots bowstrings. Fevers trim ranks in hot months. The Greeks build a palisade by their ships. They dig ditches and earthworks not because it is glorious, but because staying alive is a craft. They learn to feed and fuel a floating city. Fresh water ferried in casks, fodder for horses, dried grain guarded like treasure. Every task draws hands from the spear line. The longer the siege, the more maintenance eats the morning. Troy's strength is to let that slow grind work in its favor. With its gates shut and its stores rationed, the city turns every failed assault into another day of Greek friction. Allies inland send relief caravans by tracks the Greeks cannot easily patrol. Women and boys carry fuel and water to the upper town. Priam's council weighs each request to fight in the open and often says no. Hector argues for restraint because he can see the trap in glory. The open field invites disorder, and disorder at the wrong moment would give up the only true asset the city owns: time. This is not a world of rams and towers, grinding at stone walls. Late Bronze Age siegecraft leans on blockade, on cutting supply lines, on trickery, on waiting for the other side to blink. Fire arrows, sapped morale, negotiated betrayals. The engines are human, not mechanical. To breach a high city with ladders and nerve alone is to bleed against a cliff while a defender with a steady arm multiplies your losses. Better to thin them, starve them, or lure them out. Both camps know this. Both adjust. Attrition becomes the war. Night watch after night watch. Forays at dawn to catch foragers. Burning nearby granaries that cannot be spared. A shipwreck in a sudden storm sets back a season's worth of planning. Then, a lucky raid lands, and the Greeks haul back herds that feed 3 weeks' worth of stew, and the mood lifts. Morale swings by cycles of scarcity and surplus. A good dream in a leader's tent carries weight. A bad omen at the morning rite sours an entire day. Hector's prudence keeps the ledger close. He reminds princes that a sortie is not a festival. He insists that the city is more than its champions. He asks them to remember the children who drink from the wells behind the second wall. Hold, endure. Let the assault waste itself against the fact of your gate. It is the advice that saves cities. It is also the advice that insults egos. Trojan leadership hears him. Then pride knocks. A bright day tempts the bold into the open field for a few strides too many. A victory chase drifts far from the horns. Men call for pursuit when the line should reform. In those breathless minutes, the wall they can no longer touch becomes a horizon that might as well be the moon. That is when risk swells. Honor buys noise. The quiet, stubborn arithmetic Hector practices loses votes. For the Greeks, the same arithmetic bites from another angle. Every extra day on that beach strains the alliance. Commanders with their own kingdoms to mind start counting winters. Disputes over spoils prick old rivalries. Strong personalities scrape. When supplies run thin, leaders blame each other's carelessness. When a champion slays a foe, voices rise to claim that the gods favor their own house above the rest. Unity is a rope rubbed against stone. It frays where it is pulled tight. So, the paradox grows. The greatest military mass in living memory, pinned to a shoreline by a city that refuses to meet it on its terms. And yet the refusal is the point. Troy converts Greek strength into hunger, boredom, and infighting. Each day the gates hold, another camp rumor matures into bitterness. That bitterness will soon find an outlet when a king reaches for a prize to assert rank, and a fighter decides he will not stand for it. Before that break, the war teaches small, hard lessons. Move at dusk, guard the wells, rotate watches, keep horses light for the noon heat. Do not taunt from the slope when archers have a clear field. And for Troy, do not let triumph sing you past your threshold. A single step too far from the shade of your wall creates a gap wider than any breach. That ignored warning repeats until it bites. We have been focused on stones and stores, but the real engine is human stamina. Women in Troy stretching grain. Old men in the camp stitching sandals with hands that once held spears. Younger boys carrying waterskins for pay. It is a city and an army trying to outlast the other's will to labor. The gods touch the scales, but they do not carry sacks. That work lands on backs and shoulders and feet. The mini payoff is sharp. Troy's strength is time. It cannot match Greek numbers in the field. It does not need to. Each sunrise the wall still stands. A little more unity leaks from the camp onto the tide line. The Greeks win raids and lose patience. The Trojans lose skirmishes and keep the city. The math is cruel and even. Inside the Greek camp, the crucial fault forms where pride rubs against protocol. A leader's reach for authority will soon humiliate the only man his army cannot afford to alienate. And when honor curdles into grievance, the balance that walls and rations achieved in months will flip in hours. Chapter 5. A king insults a weapon. How do you blunt the sharpest blade without lifting a shield? You insult it. You strip rank in public, then call it justice. That is what Agamemnon does when he reaches into Achilles' tent and takes Briseis, not as a lover, but as a statement. He returns Chryseis to end a plague, then demands a compensatory prize to prove that the king's hand sets the scale. The move is legal in the vocabulary of spoils. It is also reckless. A commander asserts hierarchy and, in the same stroke, reduces his best weapon to silence. Achilles answers with absence. He pulls the myrmidons from the line. He sits, not sulking, but refusing to fuel a machine that has humiliated him in front of men whose loyalty is bound to the currency of honor. The camp feels the gap like a pulled beam. The tempo falters. Leaders who counted on the shock of Achilles' charge now count hours and losses instead. War is a rhythm. When the drum stops, The formation wobbles. Troy senses it first. Hector tightens his harness and tests the sand at the waterline. Patrols edge closer to the Greek wall. Skirmishes stretch into pushes. The ditch by the ships becomes a contested edge rather than a buffer. Momentum, that invisible ally, moves to the Trojan side. Even the sound of battle changes. Less thunder, more grind, more Greek shouting in defense than in attack. Achilles does not just sit, he prays. He asks that the Greeks feel the lack his withdrawal creates, that their suffering teach the lesson pride refused to learn. The divine weather responds. Favor tilts. On days when the Greeks once pressed the gates, they now cling to their palisade. Spears thud into shields that wait rather than seek. The sea, so often their escape, becomes a wall against their backs. This is where the deeper engineering of a warrior culture shows. Honor is not ceremony tacked onto war. It is war's scaffolding. Men risk their lives for standing among peers, for the look in a comrade's eyes, for the song that will say their name without a wince. Strip that, and you do not only harm feelings, you sever the nerve that moves the arm. Morale shapes formations. It determines whether a line bends or breaks when the first wedge finds a gap. Agamemnon misreads the physics. He thinks he can yank a man's token prize and not yank his power with it. Nestor, old and the color of old bronze, warns him that this is fire in dry grass. Odysseus, who understands the price of alienating indispensable assets, pushes for restitution. Gifts are promised. Tripods, horses, gold, oaths. The list grows with the delay, and with each added item, the apology sounds more like procurement than respect. Achilles waits, and the clock turns offers into proof that they were not made when they mattered. By the time the embassy reaches him, the field has changed. The Trojans have hammered the Greek wall. Fires have flared by the stern posts. Sarpedon and Glaucus carve their way through lesser men who know they stand in the place where a greater man once stood. The gifts land on a table already claimed by injury. Timing is strategy. An apology delivered after a crisis looks like fear, not contrition. Hector works inside the window that Achilles opened. He is not naive. He knows a day's good wind can mislead a sailor into reefs. He tells his men to take what the field gives and to stop when the map of risk turns red. He fears overreach, the enemy of defenders who start to believe they are fated to win in the open. He keeps counsel with older chiefs who remember the first years and the cost of chasing glory beyond the shadow of home walls. Greek cohesion thins. Arguments break out during rations. The grievance spreads from Achilles' tent into smaller resentments between lesser captains. Every delay sharpens old slights. Champions with fewer lines in the epics feel the pull to prove themselves in Achilles' absence. They launch sorties that look brave on the day and foolish by the week. A coalition forged by an oath now wobbles under the strain of pride, reasserting itself within the ranks. Meanwhile, gods answer prayers in ways that feel like weather, not decree. A cloud over a right, a lucky throw that lands point first through a gap in bronze, a stumble on dry ground at a bad instant. The camp turns these into signs that Achilles' anger has weight beyond the human. Men who once thought him one of many now think him a keystone, and they resent their dependence as much as they fear the alternative. The cascade is mechanical now. Achilles withdraws. The Myrmidons vanish from the wedge where they punch through lines. The Trojans test, then commit. The Greek beachheads sway like huts in surf. Patrols that once sketched maps far inland now hug the ditch. Standards that stood back from the wall for pride's sake now hang on it for shelter. An army that marched across the sea begins to measure victory as a day without a fire in the stern timbers. Nestor returns to the theme, with the insistence of someone seeing a wheel lose spokes in slow motion. Send formal gifts. Admit the wrong. Let others carry the message if the king cannot bow his head. Odysseus shapes the words, aiming for dignity that does not abase the throne and deference that does not insult Achilles' rank. They carry promises and the weight of too many days. Achilles hears them and feels the ledger's imbalance. He does not throw them out. He also does not rise. Hector's caution holds the city back from burning the ships. He could press harder. He does not. He tells his men that a city's duty is to survive, not to drink the enemy's blood to the lees. He counts the cost of fighting among tents and ropes, where formations break and accidents multiply. He senses that fate grants windows, not guarantees, and that overreach in the hour of advantage is how defenders become besieged again. Without Achilles, the Greeks rely on borrowed courage. They ask Ajax to hold gaps that used to need no reinforcement. They put Diomedes where the fight is thickest and pray his arm does not tire. They build routines of mutual aid, relay charges, and staggered reserves. They fight like men stepping into a room they know belongs to someone else, performing the tasks he once performed, while pretending that nothing essential has changed. Leadership failure rebalances the war more than any single duel. A sentence spoken in anger has the force of a cavalry charge. A hand that reaches for a captive sends a shock through 1,000 spears. The battlefield responds to policy the way a sea answers a shift in the moon. You do not see the pull, you see the tide. In the quiet after a day's chaos, a friend asks for a favor, not treasure, not honors, a set of armor that belonged to another man. It will ride into battle soon, gleaming with a name it does not carry, and leave an echo that will bring the absent weapon roaring back. Chapter 6. The Friend Wearing Another Man's Glory. Can a city be saved by a substitute? For a day, yes. For a war, no. The Greeks learn that truth the hard way when the camp's heartbeat falters and a friend asks for a borrowed face. Achilles refuses to fight. The palisade groans. Fires lick at ship prows. Patroclus comes to him not with a boast, but with a plea. Lend me your armor. Let the Trojans think you've risen. Let fear do what your spear once did. Achilles grants it, but sets limits with a cold clarity. Drive them from the ships. Break their momentum. Do not chase to the walls. Do not take my rage for your own. He hands over the helmet, with the plume that has sent men running for years, and tries to fix a boundary in a world that refuses to keep lines where heat and dust blur vision. It is a rational order delivered into the most irrational place on earth. When Patroclus steps from the tent, the Greeks rally as if a drought broke. The bronze gleams in shapes they recognize. The crest they trust lifts. The myrmidons form around him, the old wedge tight and eager, and the first push cracks the Trojan advance, like clay in a kiln. Men who had measured their deaths by feet of sand find they can breathe and move. The ditch fills with bodies moving the wrong direction. The shoreline, minutes ago a trap, turns back into a harbor. This is where limits begin to fail. Adrenaline blinds the ledger. The line yields, and Patroclus tastes the sweet intoxication of a rout. Teams in panic abandon chariots. Shields drop. The habit of pursuit takes over. He presses them to the gates, and the dust of the plain becomes a curtain around a choice he was not given to make. He was told to stop. He does not. Destiny hardens at thresholds, and the Scaean gate is won. Omens had already suggested caution. Birds wheeled in patterns that made men mutter. a spearhead dulled oddly when it should have cut. Achilles' words, simple and binding, carried the weight of foresight. Patroclus hears them in memory only after the walls loom, when the rhythm of his breath shortens and the shouts turn strange. But the heat of success is a tyrant. It makes obedience feel like surrender. In the first clash near the towers, the gods make their preference tangible. Apollo, protector of Troy, strikes Patroclus from behind, not with a blade, but with a shock that melts joints and turns muscle to slack rope. Helmets can't stop that. The crest that had sent fear out like a scent flies from his head. His vision empties for a beat that costs everything. Stunned, he staggers, and in that wobble, a young fighter named Euphorbus slides a spear point through flesh. Not fatal. A mark. The kind of first wound that teaches you are mortal again. Patroclus tries to recover, but he is now a man inside a story that has picked up speed. The armor keeps luster, but the man inside it is slipping. Hector arrives, drawn to the blaze he thinks is Achilles. He sees the wobble, reads the opening, and drives in the final blow. Bronzes speak in dull thuds. The substitute collapses where the real man should have stood, and the moment snaps, identity in half. Armor stripped, body exposed, name inverted. The field learns the difference between a silhouette and a person. In epic, armor is not a shell. It is a resume hammered in metal. It carries rank, lineage, and the visible presence of divine favor. To wear Achilles' gear is to borrow his aura, his history, his mother's plea to the gods for a life of renown. But aura is not skill, and borrowed lineage cannot steady a hand beyond its training. The Greeks who cheer think they see Achilles. The Trojans who fear think he has returned. Both are dealing with an image that cannot bear the weight of its own expectations. The stripping of the corpse is a ritual of power. Hector takes the armor as a trophy. He fits it to his own body, and in doing so, he invites the paradox to deepen. The skin of his greatest enemy now clads him. A sign intended to terrify the Trojans now sits on their champion's shoulders. Divine favor migrates in public view, or so it appears. But the gear carries its own gravity. When a man wears another's glory, he also inherits the attention of the forces that shaped that glory's fate. Warnings laced the hours before this. Achilles said no pursuit. A minor omen in camp went sour. Even the way Patroclus' strap caught earlier as he armed himself should have tugged his pride. These signals do not fail because they are faint. They fail because momentum talks louder. He presses where he should pause. He trusts courage to fill a gap in instruction. This is the ignored warning that changes a campaign. When word reaches Achilles, the wrong name on the ground, the right friend inside it, grief detonates. It is not theatrical. It is a private thing that knocks the air from a chest and makes the world too bright. Then it becomes a blade. Achilles' wrath is reborn, no longer rooted in insult, but in the loss of the only person whose words could bend his will. Personal loss sets strategy. What no embassy could achieve, a single death makes inevitable. Strategically, the day does both things at once. Patroclus saves ships and men. He buys hours and men's lines. He also spends the Greeks' future interest by triggering the return of a fighter who will not savor limits again. The cost is counted in weeks lost to mourning rites, to the fight over the body, to the upheaval the camp must absorb before it can stand behind a rearmed leader. A new armor is required. The old set, now on Hector, cannot come back. Thetis will go to the only forge that can make an answer to a grief of this size. Metal will flow in shapes that carry stories, and sky as if the world itself must be hammered into a shield to contain what is about to happen. The request is practical and cosmic. Achilles cannot fight naked. He also cannot fight with anything less than a world on his arm. So the mini payoff stands. A friend in borrowed splendor saves a day and costs the army many more. The Greeks trade immediate survival for a coming storm. Grief, sharpened by guilt and outfitted by a god, will soon become the spear that cuts the plain in clean lines. In a quiet cave, far from the clamor, a mother kneels to a smith. The coals brighten, the tongs lift. The forge fires answer a plea. Chapter 7. The Shield That Shows the World. Why linger on a shield's artwork in the middle of a war? Because the images tell you what is at stake when a single man decides to turn back toward the fight. Thetis goes to Hephaestus with a simple demand and a heavy subtext: forge new armor for Achilles. The smith answers with a full world in bronze, not just a cuirass and greaves, but a shield that carries cities in peace, cities at war, harvests in rhythm, the night sky laid out in constellations. It is a map of human life, contracts, festivals, murder, judgment, held in a circle you can lift. You can feel how deliberate that pause is. The epic, which has run on clashes and duels, stops and looks outward. Streets where dancers move in step, markets where hands trade goods without spears between them. Wedding processions, legal councils, shepherds under a quiet moon. Then siege scenes, ambush at a river, a town under alarm, women crying out from towers as defenders rush to the gates. The shield does not choose one world over the other. It shows both, layered like seasons. The tension is sharp. Achilles' mind has narrowed to one vector: find Hector, make him pay for Patroclus. But the shield he straps on refuses to be narrow. It announces that fate stretches past a single feud. Here is the year turning. Here are stars that have watched 1,000 rages burn out. Here are farmers with hands in the soil, indifferent to the clamor a day's march away. Rage feels large inside a chest. Against a cosmos, it measures small. That contrast is the insight. The poem zooms out. It reminds us that Achilles is one man inside a net of rights, cities, and recurring time. The shield acts like a microscope and a telescope at once. Close details of human custom and the vastness of cosmic order. To carry it is to bear civilization's fabric on your arm while you help unravel it step by step. That is the paradox pressed into metal. Scholars have long read this object as a meta-epic, not a mere tool, but the story's thesis coded into images. Life at its most fragile and its most organized, balanced against the corrosive pull of vengeance. The art is not comfort. It is a standard against which the coming frenzy will be measured. You can raise a city. You can also grind it to ash. The shield contains both results and asks which future a fighter serves when he lowers his spear. Warnings are embedded in that circle. You could read them if you wanted to. Achilles does not. He takes the world on his arm and moves to break a piece of it with clarity that leaves no lane for reflection. The scales tip back to Greece because one warrior returns with a purpose that no counsel can dilute. Men who had clung to their walls now push forward under a crest that seems to bend chance itself. Outside the Scaean gate, the day narrows into its core scene. Hector knows what waits. He has heard Priam beg him to stay within the walls, to preserve the city's heart rather than gamble it on a single exchange. He has held Andromache as she named the life at stake, the child whose future depends on a husband alive rather than a name sung over ashes. He listens, then steps out. Honor drags him forward, not bravado. He has defended restraint for years. Now restraint would look like fear, and fear would rot the resolve he has built in others. The duel tightens. Achilles drives him in circles, the two of them skirting the city in a chase that blurs into ritual. The gate stands near. Safety is a few strides away, if pride would yield. It does not. Spear casts miss, are returned, are traded for feints and taunts. Hector tries to pick a moment to stand and plant his feet. Achilles refuses moments. He creates one, a misdirection, a rush, a strike honed by grief, and a body trained past ordinary limits. Death comes quickly when it finally arrives. Breath leaves as if pulled by a string. The plain hears the fall. The balance, so long sustained by walls and counsel, collapses onto a single kill. And then comes the second act that will bruise the victor's humanity. Achilles binds the body to his chariot. He drags a prince in the dust before his family's eyes, outside the gate that he chose not to re-enter. The message is as clear as metal on stone. It is also a wound that echoes beyond the day. That desecration becomes the hinge for the next scene we will reach. Priam, father and king, will go at night into the enemy's camp with nothing but a plea and the courage to put his lips to the hand that killed his son. For now, we hold at the gate where mourning and rage meet public ritual. The city wails. The woman who begged for caution now sees the cost counted in the figure tied to a car. The mini payoff stands. Achilles, armed with a world on his shield and a storm in his chest, restores momentum to the Greek side. He knocks the confidence from Troy. He recovers the body of his friend. He reclaims the center of the field. But he spends a part of himself to do it. The shield cities at peace look fragile against the man who cannot presently honor peace, even in death. He will need to find his way back to human measure, or be remembered as a tool of revenge that forgot its limits. So, the shield that shows the world does its work. It frames the act. It refuses to let us think of the duel as just an athletic contest. It sets the stakes in households, in laws, in fields, in stars. Achilles takes it off only after the day's fury is done, and by then, the bronze has recorded another chapter of the unraveling it warned against. In the quiet that follows, a tent waits with lamps low. A king will enter under a truce of grief. Two old enemies will sit, share bread, and let tears do what argument could not. Chapter 8. Cassandra's Mouth No Ears. What good is perfect prophecy when the people who need it have trained themselves not to hear? That is Cassandra's ground. She sees the threads before they pull tight, names the knot, and watches listeners nod politely, then do the opposite. Her curse is precise. True foresight paired with disbelief. In Troy's last year, that combination becomes a slow blade. You can place her in the upper town, where smoke from the altars settles in courtyards, and the talk drifts between hope and fatigue. She stands at thresholds, speaks in the cadence of ritual, and marks out dangers with the specificity of someone who has watched patterns repeat. The court knows her story. They also know their own exhaustion. Years of alarms have eroded nerves. A warning that would have shocked them in the first month now lands like the sound of a distant storm they've learned to sleep through. That is the tension. The accuracy of her forecasts collides with leaders who crave a break more than they crave truth. They want a day without counsel that dampens their brief relief. They want signs that justify openings for celebration, births, small victories, holidays that mark time without sharpening fear. When Cassandra says the war is not done, that a new tactic approaches, that the Greeks will change the shape of the fight rather than its aim, she is right. The rightness works against her. She names continuities that matter. The Greeks are not retreating. They are cycling. They have learned the walls. They have mapped the river crossings and the foraging routes. They will look inactive and strike in a manner that bypasses stone. She names deception as the form of the final act. Not a battering ram, not a heroic breach, but a scheme that feels like piety or truce and coils around the city's trust. Episodes collect around her voice. She warns against opening gates for relief that arrives too easily. She tells them to watch the timing of Greek sailings that align too neatly with festival days, to scrutinize gifts, to treat smooth narratives with the suspicion they reserve for bad omens. She points at the way Greek patrols vanish, not as a sign of weakness, but as a repositioning, the kind of change that precedes a feint. She names a trap that will roll forward under its own charm. Timbers and wheels coupled with a story built to flatter Trojan hopes. But repetition does strange work inside institutions. The more often a dissenting voice remains correct while being dismissed, the more its social capital decays. The Cassandra principle, distilled from stories like hers, captures this paradox. Warnings repeated without adoption numb response. Leaders begin to experience accuracy as harassment. Each confirmation of the warning's truth deepens resentment because it forces a reckoning they do not want. The messenger becomes a symbol of discomfort rather than an ally against it. So statements that should increase her credibility wear it away. She calls out Greek deceptions. A raid confirms it. Commanders bristle. She undercuts the celebratory reading of a favorable omen. The day ends without disaster. Listeners chalk up their safety to their own caution rather than her intrusion. Institutional deafness grows. It is not a dramatic mutiny. It is a series of small sidesteps, delayed meetings, and assignations of her counsel to lesser rooms and later hours. Divine intervention does not simplify this noise. It amplifies it. Gods send signs that overlap, contradict, or arrive without context. Dreams tug leaders toward opposite courses. A snake on a step, a flame that flares too brightly, a bird that breaks pattern. Each can be read three ways by three different factions. Pride acts as the filter. People hear the pieces that redeem their faction's stance and discard the parts that force costly changes. Cassandra speaks into that acoustic and sounds like a drum beat in a room that wants flutes. You can sense how the palace routines pivot away from her. Attendants warn each other that another bad hour is coming if she is admitted before a celebration. Priam listens, then sets her aside for a council that has already chosen its comfort. Andromache takes her hand, but cannot realign a city's appetite for relief. Even Hecuba, who loves her, bargains with hope. They tell themselves that vigilance and despair are the same thing. They are not. Vigilance demands effort. Despair saps it. Her specificity continues. She calls for controlled fire drills at night, inspections of gate mechanisms, a policy that refuses large movable objects within the walls without full disassembly. She argues for double verification on any ritual claims that would suspend normal caution, because ritual is the likely vessel for the trick. She warns that a single narrative carried by a plausible enemy captive can anchor belief and override experience. She does not speak in riddles here. She speaks in procedure. The city answers by nodding, then placing more weight on the desire for a holiday. They plan dances. They promise rest. They do not rebuild watch rotations to compensate for feast intoxication. They tell themselves they have earned ease. In doing so, they make ease the condition for their judgment. When Cassandra says the ease itself is the bait, they hear only the insult embedded in the diagnosis. They refuse to be treated as children, and so they lean farther toward what flatters them. Her tragedy reframes Troy's defeat. It was not only a failure of arms, it was a crisis of attention. A system that could evaluate data had trained itself to mute sources that produced discomfort, confirmation bias, sunk cost loyalty to a narrative of eventual safety, and the social penalty attached to the spoiler voice combine into a culture that cannot integrate accurate threat assessments when they arrive at the wrong emotional pitch. The gods may set conditions, but the city chooses how to listen. This is the mini payoff. Cassandra's arc teaches us to watch where institutions store their fatigue. It tends to pool near the procedures that test good news. It tends to drown the signal that would force a change of habit. She does not stop seeing. She stops being granted the status that turns sight into policy. Her words beat air, while carpenters elsewhere plane timbers that will speak more clearly to a tired audience than any warning ever could. The last opportunity to listen approaches not in a shout, but on wheels and timbers. A narrative will arrive that makes men feel pious, competent, and safe. It will seem to answer prayers about an end to labor and a return to normal time. Cassandra will speak against it with the same clarity she always has. She will be right in the way she has always been right. The city will thank her with patience and proceed. And so, as evening leans over the plain, another voice prepares to make the same case without visions. He will use rope and spear, not omens. He will test wood with iron and listen for hollow truth hidden by a story. Chapter 9. Laocoon's Rope Bite. If someone tells you to test a gift with a spear and you hear hollow wood, what do you do next? You either trust the echo or you explain it away. Troy chooses the second path, and the knight learns their answer. The beach looks empty. Greek fires go dark. Their masts vanish toward Tenedos, a small island close enough to watch a shoreline and far enough to look like retreat. On the sand, a towering wooden horse remains, wheels beneath its feet, timbers planed smooth, fresh rope still smelling of pitch and salt. The mood inside Troy tilts toward relief. After years of fear, a clean narrative arrives. The enemy is gone. A sacrifice stands in their place. Then a man appears who knows how to supply a story. Sinon, ragged and bound to sell the part, claims he is a Greek left behind as an offering. He speaks in the key that courts prefer: plausible grievance, insider detail, providence that flatters the listener. He lays out a tale of offended gods and a charm that requires this object to stand inside a city for Greek fortunes to rise. He layers his lies with just enough truth to stick. The Greeks owed a debt. They feared a homeward curse. They built this colossus to redirect divine favor. The council splits. Voices rise, then soften. Priam's age longs for closure. Younger men hunger for a story that lets them keep victory and dignity without another season of rations and drills. The horse looks like an answer that does not ask for more dead sons. The city prepares to bring it in. Then Laocoon breaks the mood. A priest of uncompromising temper, he carries the weight of torch and knife from the altars he serves. He does not speak for comfort. He speaks for survival. He urges caution and throws a spear into the horse's flank. The shaft bites, vibrates, and the belly answers with a muffled ring. The sound is wrong for solid timber. It's the kind of echo a craftsman hears when a cavity hides inside a beam. The test is simple. It is the sort of field check a veteran uses to judge a bridge before moving a column across it. This should have settled the debate. The evidence is physical. Rope marks scar the wood where hands have hauled. Grooves show recent drag. The thud betrays a chamber. But the city has rehearsed relief so often that it can turn proof into an irritation. Before the moment can harden into policy, something happens that recasts caution as impiety. From the water, two serpents rise and drive straight for the shore. They coil around Laocoon and his sons. The scene is fast and merciless. Muscles tighten, ribs snap, voices choke. The city reads it as an omen. The priest who struck the offering is killed in the act of reproach. People conclude a god is angry, not with the Greeks, but with the man who warned against their trick. Fear translates the spectacle into a verdict. Laocoon's counsel turns, in a breath, into a crime against ritual. Ancient audiences argued about this moment. Did divine will send the serpents as a direct notice? Or did shock and ritual ambiguity allow leaders to misread random horror as sanction? Either way, the effect is the same. A miracle narrative overrides an empirical test. The thud in the wood loses to the sight of coils and blood. The city elevates spectacle over evidence, which is how traps thrive. When ritual becomes the lens for every data point, it can invert truth and make caution look like arrogance. There are other cues they could have weighed. Rumors circulate that the Palladium, Troy's Palladion, its sacred protecting image, was stolen in a night raid. If true, the ritual shield that once justified trust in the walls no longer stands. The city has a vacuum where its certainty used to be. Into that space, Sinon's script pours smoothly. A great religious object leaving meets a great religious object entering. People let symmetry masquerade as logic. You can feel the temperature shift as dusk approaches. The day shortens, and with it, patience. Laborers fix ropes to the horse. Teams push at wheels. Women scatter petals and burn incense, grateful for the chance to honor a supposed peace. Musicians tune. Guards who would have been strict at noon loosen their grip as light fades, and a holiday mood settles over the square. The gates open to folly because it feels like piety. The horse rolls over the threshold, and the city applauds its own generosity. The mini payoff is clear and merciless. The most explicit test available, wood-answering spear with hollow sound, confirms danger. Yet a single spectacle, read as divine anger, silences the warning. Ritual, which should hedge risk, is used to justify it. The Greeks have laid more than timber. They have laid a narrative. The Trojans accept it because it allows them to turn exhaustion into virtue. This is how the gods rig the field without touching a latch. They let signs permit two readings. They allow sincere piety to become armor for self-deception. The people choose the version that grants immediate comfort and long-term ruin. The horse sits inside the walls now, a quiet engine with a door in its ribs, and men counting heartbeats in the dark. You are there at street level as carts roll past and children reach out to touch the smooth flanks. You hear the faint settle of timber as the frame adjusts to new pressure. You catch the smell of tar in the evening air and the sweetness of spilled wine from a victory cup. You notice gate hinges eased with oil before they shut for the night. All of it feels like maintenance. All of it is preparation for something no one in the square wishes to name. Night tilts. Guards take posts with a confidence that belongs to festivals, not sieges. The city's many hands release their hold on vigilance and turn to celebration. Behind a panel, a knot works loose, rope slides, a hatch shifts. The first whisper of leather against wood is softer than the wind. Hinges turn. Flames wait. Chapter 10. Night of Unlatching. A city does not die in a single scream. It unhooks itself from safety one hinge at a time, gate by gate. The horse sits inside the square like a trophy, taller than any man can measure with his arm. Ropes coil slack at its wheels. The crowd thins to clusters, then to pairs, then to drifting shadows. Troy feasts, cups pass, meat smokes. Watchposts that once demanded 2 pairs of eyes now make do with 1, and a promise. You can hear the lull. The air itself feels different. Sinon keeps his part alive with small tasks that look like piety. He pours a libation near the horse's leg. He drifts toward a brazier at the edge of the square, where festival torches are stacked like reeds. When the moon lifts into a high, cold slot, he moves to the wall walk and lights the signal. It is not a bonfire. It is a quiet, disciplined glow. One flame shielded with a pot lid, then uncovered, then covered again. Out at sea, that blink is a sentence. Beneath the horse's flank, latches loosen. Leather sighs. The first man slides through the hatch on his stomach, then drops into dust without a sound. He rises and runs for the gatehouse with a blade meant for rope, not flesh. Behind him, pairs emerge, each with a task already carved into their minds. Cut the pin on the postern, kill the nearest sentry, get the inner bar up from its housing. No shouting, no drum, just breath and the click of wood withdrawn from wood. The fleet rows back from Tenedos, with oars wrapped in cloth. Hulls move like dark fish. They aim for the harbor mouths they studied for years and measured by stars and habit, not markers. A handful of men on each ship handle the line ashore, bare feet gripping weed-slick stones. They keep their silence because the city gives them cover. Laughter from a courtyard, a song drifting across roof tiles. A gate creaks as if friendly hands tend it. The mechanics of the takeover click into place. Detached teams seize stairwells that run inside the wall thickness. Others sprint to the winches that raise and lower the heavy leaves of the main gate. They do not heave. They do not strain. They ease the catches with oil. They remove pegs one by one. Then they throw. The first leaf lifts. A wedge slides under. The wheel turns. The hinge opens just enough for a hand to pass a rope through, then more rope, then a man with a hook who pulls the gap wider. Signal fires on the bastions flare to life, not as alarms, but as guides. 2 quick, 1 slow, repeated. That pattern tells the fleet which harbor mouth stands open and which gate team has succeeded. Cunning replaces brute force. Instead of a battering ram, you have a lever. Instead of a line of shields, you have lockpicks and men who spent weeks memorizing the arrangement of beams in a model gate built far from here. Urban assaults in this age, when they work, compress time. Minutes do the work of months. Surprise stands in for engines. A city with layered walls can resist a season of siege, but it cannot resist a coordinated breach that turns each hinge into an ally. That is how plausible operations look at night: minimized noise, pre-assigned tasks, short routes converging actions. The epic condenses it, but the method tracks reality. The trick is not magic. It is practice and timing. The gods do not open the gates. Men do. Hands on ropes, shoulders under beams, knives at cords. The divine shows up in the ambiguity that made the horse possible. The rest is muscle memory and nerve. Now, the human cost surges in. The palace quarter wakes to screams as corridors flood with men who know the map better than they should. Priam is led to the altar in his own hall, the old man's hands on cold stone, asking for a sanctuary that war no longer respects. He falls where he once crowned sons. That is how a dynasty ends, knees on dust. Andromache is torn from a room that still holds the smell of Hector's armor. She does not plead for herself. She pleads for the child who cannot understand the shape of loss that is coming. Her captors follow orders written in spite, not law. She will live, and that sentence carries its own cruelty. Aeneas, elsewhere in the crisis, shoulders his father. He does not pretend to save a city. He saves a line. He picks a path between falling beams and courtyard fires, guided by a household god, taken down from its shelf. The weight on his back is not only age, it is memory moving through heat toward a shore. Fires stack, first a stable, then a granary, then a roof that carried women's laughter hours ago. Soot driftcoats skin. The ash tastes like flour, burnt into brick. Alleyways become chimneys. Men who try to fight within rooms discover that a table and a doorway can be enemies as lethal as spears. House by house, the blaze maps the city's own plan, back onto it in light. Vengeance coils. Greeks who lost brothers and sons take trophies beyond what the code permits. The rage spills past soldiers into households that never touched a spear. Prophecies begin to fulfill under the noise. The child once hidden on a battlement is dragged to the edge. A pledge made in a camp, rash and conditioned by grief, finds its target. The law of the day is simple. Who holds the gate writes the rule. You move through the streets, and it feels like 1,000 small endings layered into one night. A priest cuts his palm on a bronze edge while trying to pull a door closed. A girl trips on a threshold stone she crossed safely since she could walk. A storehouse lock gives way under a wedge, and grain pours out like a river from a broken bank. Each act is mundane. Together they are a city folding. Teams that planned for hours now improvise when plans run out. A rope snags on a cart axle. A man uses his body as a buffer to keep the gate from slamming. Another lights a beacon on a tower to guide a ship into the correct dock. The work is ugly and exact. The line between order and mayhem runs through each breath. By dawn, the walls still stand. Their contours are intact, their towers uncrumbled. What failed was not stone, but judgment. Choices, layered over years, let an enemy inside, and then fed that enemy paths and cover. A fortress can bear load. It cannot cure credulity. The mini payoff cuts clean. Troy's masonry endures to the last hour. Troy's decisions do not. Smoke blows out toward the straits. The victors stare at the light on the water and feel a new weight settle. Many will not find an easy harbor. Home awaits with storms of its own. Oaths unpaid, gods offended, houses that learned to live without them. The sun lifts on a wrecked city and on men who cannot go home easily. When a story ends in fire, why do its heroes keep walking? Because war's bill collects at home. The plane smolders, the smoke bends toward the straits, and already the reckoning spreads across the sea. Victory does not dismiss the gods or settle old debts. It opens ledgers. It puts names on lines. It asks what kind of men are returning and what they carry inside their heads when the drums stop. First, the last deaths by the walls. Achilles does not survive the ruin he helped set in motion. He falls near the same gates he circled in rage, struck down and mourned with a ritual that makes the surf sound like a drum. In his absence, a son steps forward. Pyrrhus, fierce and cold, moves through the burning streets with a style that reads as efficiency to some and sacrilege to others. Ajax, a colossus in the fights by the ships, meets an end in the aftermath that stains the ground with a grief no spear could resolve. The spoils divide in patterns that confirm what war often teaches. Distribution looks like justice to the winners of arguments, not only to the winners of battles. Homeward paths twist. Some are short and straight. Many are not. The sea that once looked like a road now behaves like a maze. Odysseus strains against currents of chance and consequence. Each landfall feels like a test, with moving answers. Storms return him to questions he thought he had settled about leadership, restraint, and the cost of cleverness. He is not alone in this. Men who counted seasons by siege lines now count them by the shape of coasts they can no longer name. Not all houses welcome their kings. Agamemnon steps back into a hall that learned to live without him. He brings trophies, stories, and the invisible smell of rituals that should not have been performed. The knives waiting in his home are not the knives of battle. They are the knives of judgment, held by those who measure justice in a balance the war tipped until it cracked. When kings fall in their own baths, the war's shadow shows you how far private rooms can travel to meet public deeds. Others vanish into quieter fates. Ships that took a hero out return with a different crew and a tale of a squall that seemed to decide on a single man and tear him from the deck. A few leaders split their contingents and test different coastal routes home, as if strategy could outthink a moral climate. The sea remains neutral, the gods are not. The memories on board shift the odds. Some who desecrate on the last night find that calm weather refuses them for weeks. Some who keep rights are offered a harbor before their water runs out. Across the straits, a different thread pulls tight. Aeneas does not pretend that he can put the city back into its footprint. He takes a father on his back, a child by the hand, and the household gods under his arm. He moves through embers with the quiet knowledge that survival is not retreat. It is a seed. His line will grow into a claim that leaps centuries, taken up later by a people who build their state on memory as much as on brick. Refuge becomes policy. A story about saving a house becomes a charter for a new one. This is where epic carries its accounting. Aftermath is not a blank. It is a court. Hubris accumulates interest. Mercy pays dividends. Sacrilege travels with you like a stain that salt water cannot lift. The poems make that point without speeches. They just show who reaches a safe shore and who does not, who sits at a hearth again, and who finds his name attached to curses, who buries a father with respect, and who sails past graves with a grin that turns to a grimace at the first hard wind. The warnings we tracked keep working. The Greeks who mocked altars, dragged bodies, or laughed at oaths meet horizons that refuse to admit them. A rope snaps on a calm day, and a mast takes a skull. A harbor that used to welcome a fleet turns its pilings into spears in a storm that came out of a clear sky. Men who honored prayers at thresholds, who returned captives without glee, find hands extended at the right time. A pilot who knows the shoals, a wind that shifts 10 degrees in their favor at the hour that matters. Set beside that, leaders who played the game of piety as a cover for convenience discover the trap closing. They thought signs could be managed, the way councils are managed, guided, reframed, spun. The world they live in refuses that. The gods push at tendons. Pride moves the bone. Outcomes follow. It is not that fate erases choice. Fate enforces the cost curve built by choices that looked cheap when everyone cheered. Aeneas's escape shows memory, turning into scaffolding. His line will carry a story that teaches a people how to think about ruin and beginning. It says that households can be ships. It says that a man who refuses to drop his father for speed can land with a claim to legitimacy strong enough to found laws. Memory becomes statecraft when it selects which pain to honor and which mercy to elevate. That selection can knit strangers into a city. So we close the ledger on the field and open the one at home. The gods set the conditions. Humans stepped into them. The choices that mattered were not only in duels, but in small, repeated refusals to listen when listening felt like humiliation. You can call it rigged. You can also call it warned. The net difference is whether pride stays at the table and declares itself wisdom. The final insight is not about gods. It is about attention. Who gets believed at the right moment? Which ritual tightens judgment and which loosens it? Whether leaders keep a rule that says good news must pass the same tests as bad news. The war's legacy lands here. Attention, humility, and the cost of certainty. They decide whether a city walks toward a gift with wheels or stops to cut it open. That is the mini payoff. The aftermath reads like a verdict written in journeys. Some paths lengthen, some close, some widen into roads that future empires will call their own. The point is plain. The same hands that raised sails could have raised questions. The price difference shows in who sleeps under his own roof. We return to the opening riddle. Apple, oath, horse. They share a structure. A small thing that claims something large. A promise that binds more than lovers. A gift that hides a blade. The next step is to hold those forms up to our own time and ask which warnings feel like insults, because they arrive when we most want relief. Conclusion. The gods set conditions. Humans supplied the collapse. Troy fell because clear warnings met pride, ritual vanity, and fatigue. A golden dare, a binding oath, a hollow echo. Each was actionable. Each was waved away. If this journey sharpened how you see societies ignore their Cassandras, like the video, subscribe to Beyond the Ancient World, and share one warning you think we overlook today. Your example matters. Let the noise of the modern world fade away. Carry this thought. Strength without listening is scaffolding for a fall. Build the habit that saves cities. Test good news, audit rituals, and keep one ear for the voice that ruins the party to save the house.